This is the fourth in our series of best practices in IEP writing, and you'll hopefully have some familiar faces as we look around the room. And Alana and I are anxious to kind of get to this, and we both spend a lot of time talking about goals. She tends to spend most of her time up in the northern part of the state, and I get the everything south of 70 or so, something like that. So we both spent some time talking about that quite a bit. So kind of looking forward to getting in some. I guess we're familiar with all the ground here that we've been talking about, but some things that we really spend a lot of time on today. So, but we're going to spend a little time also talking about transition and a little bit about the connection there, and I'll explain that kind of as we dive in to that so far. So, and as always, this is being recorded, and I want to remind everybody that this will be in our self-paced modules or in our site there. So after, if you missed part of it or you want to hear it again or share it, you'll have access to it there and be able to get into everything there as well. So with having said that, I think we're going to go ahead and dive right in. Now, some of these pieces, as we start off our conversation here, we kind of start off in the same place just about every time. And there's a reason for that. We do feel strongly that beliefs are important. So every time we talk about any aspect of IEP development, it's important to really examine um, what you believe about your students, what they're capable of, and what our role is in their lives. And so, not to say that we're trying to. I think I probably say this about every time too. Not to say that we're trying to force any beliefs on you, but that's a good place to start every conversation about serving students. Is what do we really think? What do we believe? So it's whether you agree or disagree with what you see on the screen right here, it's important to at least examine what you do think, so we understand, because it's the importance of that is that's where a lot of our decisions come from. Our belief about how students learn, where they should be as students, and how we're going to meet all of their needs. That comes from, we have to understand where that comes from, because all those decisions are going to come from our start with our beliefs anyway. So that's why we always begin that session. And I'm not going to ask you this question again, but as we think about education, we are all going to be thinking about, as the slide before said, that every student we work with starts in a general education setting, and they're general education students to begin with. But over the course of time, they may have special needs. So that's what this illustration kind of supports, is the idea that as we have access to the stairs, we also can get to the ramp if we need it, or we can find the railing, or we can go back and forth depending on the needs of the time. So it's important we have that flexibility as we are thinking about our students. So one of the things that has been kind of the core of our conversations around IEP development and best practices has just been this piece. I think David Bateman shared it with us, and just want to make sure that we remind ourselves that there are several components to good practice with this process. Procedural pieces, which we are talking about a little bit within this, but they can vary slightly within each district. So it's important, especially those of you that are newer teachers, that you understand what your local policy and procedure guides say. The step-by-step work within our IEPs is important. That it's not just, when I first, and maybe Alana can chime in with this too, but when I first started teaching in a couple different places, we didn't have anything written down so much as we had a person. We had our policy and procedure guide person. So if I had a question about that, I'd go email. Well, that was actually before email. I'd go talk to them about what do I do when this happens. And you may have that experience. I don't know if that's something that's familiar with too many people, but these things should be written down somewhere, so we have a consistent record to go back to. So that we're all doing, not that we're all doing identical things, but we all have the same source to go from. If that, hopefully that makes sense, so that we're not being confused. We're not doing wildly different things within the framework of our schools. So that's the idea with that. We want to it makes sure that we have all the components we need. So we're walking through those in this series, but that is an important process. I know our IEP system helps us maintain that concept, but we do want to make sure we are touching all those bases that are required within an IEP. We're also going to talk more today about the substantive piece of the IEP, and that's really where the best practices more often than not come into play. You know, what's the substance of the IEP? Looking at the quality of that content to make sure it's up to par and it's serving the students' needs. Like you can see here, is it sufficient for students to make progress? Is are we able to progress monitor it? And are there mechanisms in place if things are not going the way we anticipated, that we can go and make those adjustments? So if progress is not made, we can make those changes. And finally, we want to make sure that we have implemented that IEP as written. That's one of those, I mentioned this in some other trainings that I do. That's one of the few things that, you know, when you look through Article 7, that it stands alone by itself in a statement that the IEP must be implemented as written. So it's important that we consider that as we're writing it. If there's things that are inferred by the IEP that we're doing, we need to be explicit in what we're saying, so it's clear to everyone involved what's going to happen in that process. And I've run across this in some different instances too, but we do want to make it evident that parents are involved in the process. I know in previous sessions of this process, we've talked about conference notes and some different aspects of an IEP, and we want to make sure the parent's voice is present in that, not just the parent voice, but all voices at the meeting are present, including the student, if at all possible. So it's important that when we're considering implementation, all those voices have been considered. Now, it doesn't mean we all have to agree on everything, but we at least have to consider everyone's input, so we have hopefully the best possible result. So that's kind of that's the qualities and pieces of the IEP process that we have talked about, and we're going to continue to talk about. So where we're going to start today as far as content goes is to talk a little bit about transition. Now, the transition piece, there's some really good resources that I'm going to point out and share with you that are present from the Department of Education, and this Office of Special Education is in charge, and they have some resources around transition that they've been providing. They're doing training, they're doing support, and all kinds of work to make sure you have what you need. So I'm going to take you to a couple of different places so you can maybe help find some answers to questions you may have. Because these are the places that if I get questions around transition, these are the places I take folks, and hopefully they can rely on that. I won't spill the beans too much, but I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint and go to the internet, to the websites, and show you what's going on here. So the first one we're going to look at is on the Department of Education's website in the Office of Special Education. So we're going to take that link to get there. So let me make sure I'm getting to the right spot. And there we go. So this is the special education, I guess, website from under the Indiana Department of Education. And you can see as we scroll down here, there are some links for secondary transition. You can see all these different things. So if you want to know about graduation pathways, get a lot of questions around that. I know it's a question, a prompt in our IEP system. So especially if you're new to the process, or if you're just, maybe you have some students that are 7th or 8th grade that are just entering into this process and parents would like to know more, there's at least a start to those conversations. There's information around self-assessment. So one of the things that when I've done training with the post-secondary transition groups, one thing that's encouraged is just to stay on top of things. I think now the cycle is every 2 years, you're in the review cycle, and your IEPs might be pulled for and matched against the rubric that's available here. Used to be a 3-year cycle, and sometimes 3 years is a longer time than you think. As a lot of times you have a year or two where you be meeting those targets, and then things will start to fade. And so that's one reason that cycle has been shortened a little bit. But there's all kinds of pieces here that hopefully can help answer some of those basic questions around transition and some of the
Matt,
timelines that are involved. Yes.
I just have, okay, what are we reviewing on the two-year review cycle? What are you referring to?
So right now, well, there's the rotation of the monitoring rotation is every other year basically now.
That's what
So
I missed, that little
Yep.
piece right there. Thanks.
Yep. So it used to be a 3-year rotation, and there'd be well, different things would happen depending on how they reviewed your IEPs and what they found. But it's everyone's under a 2-year cycle at this point. So, and it's a little different. I know most all the reviews are handled at the Department of Education currently, I believe. So it's there's no outside agency that's performing those, and they do basically what they call desk audits, which is reviewing IEPs directly. And then if they find anything, then they'll contact and have those repaired. So this also has some information. I get questions all the time around alternate diplomas. All that information's here. So it's important to consider those kind of things. Pre-EDs, so pre-employment transition services, there's information here around those things too. Those things come up a lot when we talk high school transition, especially. So a lot of good detail here. I'm not going to try to go into a specific detail and open all these up for you, but I just want to make sure the links in the presentation, and I just want to take a little time to point those out to you. The other location, and I'm going to ask everyone this too, how many of you guys have visited the DOE's Moodle site, just as a hands up or nod, or just, or if even if you put something in chat around that. I know a lot of the information that goes through this is not always relevant to teachers, and not in a bad way. Just a lot of it is with funding and reporting and those kind of things. So as a classroom teacher, that might not be your thing, and so it gets it's not necessarily overwhelming. It's just that that those are just things you might not click for you as things you're interested in. But I want to point to, there are some good resources here, especially around transition. You do have to have an account if you haven't done that already, and it'll get you in here, and you can join the different communities. Kind of, it's a little bit like Learning Connection used to be. So I don't, that might age the room if I say that too much. It's been a while since Learning Connection's been around, but if we can go, excuse me, we can get into. I'm having a hard time seeing my screen with all my windows open, so I'm going to minimize a couple things here. So here we go. See if I can get into where I want to go. There we are. That's what I wanted to find. Special education. So Office of Special Education Community. And I get to log in real quick. That's nice. Well, I'm going to go back to our presentation just so I can point those things out to you. It looks like I'm going to have some challenges with it. I don't want you guys to have to sit through me trying to figure out what my password is. I think it just expired on me. So what's within this process, within their website, is the are all the different, I guess, references, all different tools that they've provided. There's all the PowerPoints that DOE has put in place are all there, so you can check those out and see what you can find within those things. So you can see here, I hope, I'm trying to get my screen to work correctly. Having some technical fun things today. Okay, come on. My mouse is not finding itself today, so we'll try to see. Let me stop sharing my screen for just a second and make sure we get that correct.
If you guys could throw in the chat, since while Matt's talking, I'm going to do this. tell me how your iLearn or IAM is going in your school with an emoji. So I want you just to tell me if like using an emoji, how are you feeling today? My son came home, he's a 6th grader. He tells me he's on question 28 in ELA. He doesn't tell me what it's about, but he tells me what's going on. So he's a little stressed, but how are you guys doing with your students this week? I'm just curious. Sorry, while Matt's doing that, but I was just wondering that. I like your emoji uses, so thanks, guys. Tiring. Stressed? Anybody stressed? Hopefully it's going okay. I know it just started. All right. Oh, first time you're not involved. So you're probably a good emoji. You're probably like on a beach somewhere.
Nice.
Testing for a month. Nice. Sorry, you can keep talking, Matt. I just wanted to see how it was going.
No, that's all right.
Kind of miss.
No,
I kind of miss I kind of miss that part a little bit. Sometimes I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I wish I could. I don't know. Sometimes it's kind of, I could sort of remember it.
You're Yeah, I don't know. There's too many people that are entirely missing all this
I
state
miss like
assessment stuff.
I don't know. Kids are just they're just so cute. I don't know.
Well, the kid, yeah,
Yeah.
I think we all could look forward to that.
Yeah. Super tired. Yeah. All right. Go ahead. Keep going.
That's okay. I just wanted to make sure that we have on the Moodle site that those things are there. So there's all kinds of things about the transition, the indicator 13, the rubrics, those kind of pieces are all there. The presentations they deliver around the content and the process they follow are all there. So it's fairly transparent, and hopefully that can be useful. There's also some things, I get a lot of questions around transition portfolios, a lot of useful things there as well. So hopefully that those are some good things that will, I don't know, be helpful for you down the road. I feel like that I spent a lot of time directing people to those resources, and they're really good and they're pretty accessible. So hopefully those are some good things to share as we're going forward. So do you guys have any questions or comments? I don't know if we want to open it for comments around transition, but any questions or things that you're looking for today that we can maybe help you with as far as transition goes before we dive into
Kathleen
the goals?
asked, the 2-year cycle, was that for the transition compliance? And
yeah,
just to clarify, yes. So that's what she asked in the chat. Kathleen.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. And that's, I don't know, that's been a change in the last few years, I think, from it. So it's a little bit, takes some getting used to, but that's really where we're at right now. And one of the things, it's probably about time for us to do this again, but we have worked with the transition resource teams and different, permutations over the years to get some internal consistency with the goal writing. So we've met sometimes several times a year, depending on the state of things, to review things together so that we're talking about the same things the same way. Because years ago, we had I think initially we were saying the similar things, but folks were hearing different things, if that makes any sense. So we got the old mom versus dad kind of routine. Sometimes, well, so-and-so said this, but you said this way. And even though we essentially said the same thing, people were interpreting those things differently. So we try to stay consistent whenever possible. And if we have issues, we bounce them off each other. So I think it's been a pretty good relationship from that perspective. So that's been at least my involvement with the transition teams over the years. And it's been a pretty good one. We've done presentations together and workshops at the same time, and it seems to have worked out pretty well. But that's at least a tie-in for us. Other than just talking about how the system worked around transition, we didn't spend a whole lot of time within those pieces. I would say that the big thing to leave from here is just, like we've mentioned before, the connective tissue needs to exist through the IEP. If we're looking at our evaluations for students, the transition assessments, those kind of things. It's not our opinion about how things are going. It's here's the information we have. Here's what we've collected. Here's what we know. Here's what the student's actually saying to us, and we can make the connection there. And then we can look in the IEP, and we're going to talk about that connection and goals, where you can see that thread throughout those different conversations and within the document and within the program that we kind of develop.
It would be
So-
nice if we had and I know it's not on you guys, but it would be nice if we had a standardized, I don't know what the right word would be, transition assessment that we all used. So we're
Oh.
consistent from school to school. You know what I'm saying?
I do. I
Because
think
You,
that's,
you know,
I
we
guess,
get move-in students and their school didn't ask these questions and we ask these questions and, you know, you're trying to catch up.
yeah, I get what you're saying. There are, I don't know the best descriptive word of this, but there's so many different assessments that we have available within, and I don't know that the state's ever said, here's the short list of things you must use or anything like that. And that I would tell you that in general, our state's kind of reluctant to do that just because we have every district kind of has they're independent more or less, so they have to make those decisions. So there's not many times where our state is going to mandate, here's what you must do. Even the IEP system that we have is not mandated. It's heavily encouraged and supported and paid for, but it's not a mandate that you must use that particular thing. So there's other things like
Really?
that. Oh yeah.
That's interesting. I did not know
Yeah.
that.
I'm not sure that it's a good idea not to use the system we have for free that's connected to the reporting tools and all that, but it is, that's the reality of the situation. So I'm not sure what you do otherwise right at this point, but that's reality. And there's other things that are like that, but that's the one I've been involved with mostly. So there you have it. So I'm going to start off with our introducing the goal writing process as we transition from transition into goals. Sorry, I couldn't resist saying that. We're going to talk about the goal writing process as it's kind of developed over time. And I think I might have to stay in this view for the presentation. Something goes weird with my screen when I start going to presentation mode for some reason. So I'm going to stay put in this. So hopefully that'll work for us okay. If not, we have to take a break and figure it out, but I think that'll be all right. So we're going to talk about goal writing as a process, writing measurable goals and objectives. So that's one big thing as we go into this process that to keep in mind, that as if we are required to include objectives or benchmarks into a goal as part of a goal, they still need to be measurable. So don't lose sight of that as we get deeper into these things. So some of you have recently just attended some goal training. I can see some familiar faces in there. So this is going to be a familiar sight, but this is something that we have kind of developed over the years as a illustration of our process. I like to, Alana talked to us, that goal writing wheel. I like that concept, but the idea of putting it this way, of I guess illustrating it this way, is to remind ourselves that it is a process and it's a connected process. It's a cycle. So as we begin with what we know in the present levels, it feeds through each step, I guess kind of culminating with progress monitoring. Then progress monitoring, that data feeds back into present levels for the next year. So it's a process that just continues year after year. So the idea when we started putting this together was we initially started our conversations solely with present levels, and that's kind of where we're going to start today. But I don't want to lose sight of the progress monitoring as a starting concept, because that's something that I think we share at trainings all the time, that if you don't develop this plan or this IEP or even writing a goal with an end in mind, you're going to get lost pretty quickly. If we don't think about how we're going to progress monitor a goal as we start to develop it, then it's really going to be a struggle later on as we try to make things up as we go along. So, have those conversations early around how, who's going to be available for progress monitoring. How am I going to do this? What am I progress monitoring even? And what's it supposed to look like? When? Where? All the WH questions and all that. You think those through when you're thinking through developing a goal and even developing an IEP with services and all those things. Because if we're missing who's going to do this, for example, then things start falling apart pretty quickly. And we've all seen that I'm sure we could all share stories of things where someone either changed jobs or moved on, and we counted on them for a role in our student services, and now they're not there anymore. And now what do we do? So, that's how important people, well, their people are more important than even that, but that's one way that we see that indication. So starting with progress monitoring is not a bad idea. Think about the end in mind. We're going to walk through each one of these things briefly, and then Alana's going to take us through, writing a measurable goal. So that's kind of what our agenda is for our remainder of our time here. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. A lot of people call it different things, the PLOP, the PLEP, and those kind of pieces. It's all really just present levels. We'll talk a little more about that. We're going to touch on grade level standards, aligning to grade level standards. We'll touch on those pieces. Also accommodations and modifications. And honestly, almost each one of these things we could spend a whole day talking about separately. So we'll just be giving us a nice overview of each one. We'll touch on specially designed instruction and how that's connected to goal writing. And then we'll spend the rest of our time around standards aligned goals. Now we do have, and if we have time, we'll see at the end of our time together, if you have goals that you're challenged by, we might ask you to share those with us, or we have some samples we can pull down and kind of look at together if that's something you'd like to do. We'll have some choices here at the end, just kind of see where we're at that point. So we'll go with that. So that's kind of the goal writing process, and just reminding ourselves that the components of that IEP are connected. They are, the heart of that conversation is the student's needs, and that connects each piece literally by the data that we've collected. So it's important that we consider that as we go through this process. It's not just something we make up out of the thin blue air. We have connection to the process we developed here. So with having said all that, and just as an overview, I'm going to dive into the first piece here, and that's our present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. So some of you have heard me say this before, heard us say this before. The big idea initially is that the present levels are current and relevant. So one of the things that's unsaid, that was not on the page there, is that ensures that we have new information each annual case review. So every annual meeting, our present levels should be updated. Not, I guess should is too soft of a word, they must be updated. So there should be new information for our students there that pertains to their current present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. So that I can't say that strongly enough, truly. But I also want to mention, as we count on this information being current, it should also be relevant. So this hopefully gives us some permission to remove things that are out of date, that no longer are relevant to the students' needs right now. And what might, I don't know, sometimes this gets a little controversial when I talk about it in training, but think about those, when I talk about relevancy, think about the information that we currently share in your IEPs. Is it helping us develop that IEP? Is it helping you as a team, as a teacher of record, develop a better IEP for that student? If it's not helping us do that, if it's not giving us the information we need in order to develop a plan for the student or program, then we have to ask ourselves, what's the purpose? So I'm not going to go too deeply into that, but I just wanted to throw that out as a question, just a thought that, I probably should stop right there. But just think that through as we're going through our routine of what do we add to this? Is it helping? Is it just adding to the noise, or is it helping me focus on what we need to know about the student? Because remember that one of the purposes of present levels is not only to record right now how the student's able to function, give us a good profile of that, but it's going to help us identify those needs and those learning barriers for us. If the information we're gathering is not doing that, then we're going to struggle with that. And one of the reasons that we initially put present levels as a part of this conversation was looking at folks who are struggling with goal writing. And a lot of times what we would find is the present levels were incomplete or really barely existent. So it's important that we spend some time gathering good information, collecting it, sharing it here, so we have good basis for our the rest of our IEP, really good baseline information. So that kind of current and relevant is key. We do ask, and our state requires that we write skill-based goals. So it only makes sense that we have skill-based present level statements as well. So think through that as you go through that. We want to stay away from broader statements like, students, we were just talking about it beforehand, students' reading level is below grade level. Well, that might be a true statement. It really doesn't give you a whole lot of information on the why. Why is it? What's the issue that we can address? What's the actual learning barrier that's keeping that student from performing at that level we were expecting? So that's a big idea. Alana,
Hey,
go
Matt,
ahead.
Are you the chat? Are you do you see the chat?
I can't see it, no.
Oh, okay, so some people were asking how current is current within the last year,
Oh.
3 months, or last reporting period, and then somebody answered back most recent grades, and then they're talking about the current NWEA scores and the iReady scores, which can go in the present levels, but we always like to talk about the fact that if the parents or whoever's reading it doesn't understand what the Alexia score or NWEA score is, we need to talk about what deficits or strengths the students have within those strands, not just the score in the present levels. So really digging a little deeper into, if the students are doing well with decoding or problem solving, we need to actually put those in there and not just the scores. So you can talk a little bit about that, but that was kind of what's going on.
Yeah, I don't know if I need to say too much more than that. That was
Okay.
good. Yeah, I appreciate that. But that's whenever we have things like so I usually call test scores or even classroom grades more outcomes. So there's a lot that's wrapped up in those scores and lexiles and those kind of pieces. So unless, like Alana said, we do the work and say, okay, what's the piece that's missing, or where is the student consistently struggling, or what, I guess, to use a phrase we had earlier, what's the learning barrier here? That doesn't tell us a whole lot of information, or it doesn't necessarily give us what we need in order to start developing a plan for that student. So it's good information to share, but like Alana said, a lot of times we have to take it a step further. Like, what does this Lexile score mean? What is it telling me as a teacher? If I read this Lexile score, if I read this test score from iReady or NWEA, or what does that tell me? What does it tell me I need to do? Because that's part of what we had to share within that meeting. Now, as far as relevancy that it goes back in time, I suppose, is it helping you write the IEP right now? I always think about it in terms of like behavior, for example. A student who's got maybe some physical problems, well, not physical problems, but they have maybe they tend to be aggressive or something like that. Maybe that incident happened a little while ago, a couple of years ago. It may still be relevant to today. We want folks to understand what's going on and paint a clear picture of that student. And not necessarily, if it's no longer relevant, if it's not, that if something happened 4 years ago and the students now has improved so much that's no longer relevant, then what's the point? We also can remind ourselves that for the foreseeable future, we're going to have an electronic IEP to rely on. So anything in the past that we want to go check out, you can go look at the previous IEP. So we're not erasing it from history just because it's not on this IEP, but it's still in the record. We just want to help ourselves focus on what's relevant for this IEP that we're writing right now. What do I need to know? What's going to help me develop the best plan when I say I don't want to imply that it's not a team effort. The best plan that we can develop. What's the best information we can pull together? It's fine to report grades and test scores and things like that within this, but I try to remind folks, and I'm probably spending too much time on this right now, but that those things, the IEP is not the only place where those things are reported. The students' grades parents should be aware of what the students' grades are, and you can certainly share those with them at the meeting, but that's not something necessarily, I guess, not necessarily necessary to that IEP. And I guess part of it for me is just to remind ourselves that just because the students in special education doesn't mean the grades are going to be perfect. And just because they have reached their annual goals doesn't mean their grades have necessarily changed in the curriculum, in the general education classes they're enrolled in. They may be making some great gains, but it may be a while before we see that outcome change as far as a classroom grade. So those are grades or kind of can be a little of a touchy subject when you think through that, because students can be making some incredible progress, but still not be reflected in the classroom grades. Likewise, students could really be struggling and their grades still look okay. So we have to be careful if we count on those solely as a resource. Speaking of grades and academics, though, we do want to make sure that we touch on academic and functional skills as we go through the review of present levels. One of the things I ask everybody, if you can throw it in the chat or however you'd like to talk about it, but a lot of districts use templates to help themselves out with goals. And I would encourage you, is there anybody who's currently uses a template, whether your district has it or maybe it's something you've made up yourself? Anybody use present level templates out there in the world? A few.
There's some yes and no's.
Yes
No,
and
a lot of
no's.
yeses. There's one no. Yep.
So one thing, well, two things I would say. First of all, if you're willing or able to share your present level templates, that might be helpful to have. So I can put those, if you want to, send them our way, and I'll make sure they get into that in either our Padlet or our self-paced module. So you can get those if you're looking for one. We can share some examples, and we've got a couple we can share that are in our Padlet also. But those generally help us make sure we don't overlook anything. That's the idea behind it. We just want to make sure that we're not forgetting to talk about a specific academic area or touch on the functional skills that way. And sometimes it's just a matter of saying that those are age appropriate, and here's how we know that kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be full on, page review of each item, but it should be something said about those things so we're clear. I would also leave with this, that in that area that if you're getting feedback from general education teachers, it is okay to summarize things. That you don't have to repeat the same, hey, the students have the same struggle in reading in all these classes. Well, what can we do just to summarize that? Because sometimes I think from a parent perspective, that can be a little overwhelming to hear a repeat of the same thing for several different areas. So it's okay to summarize. And that's something I learned by going through those transition workshops. That's something we used to talk about quite a bit. And the last piece of this is really to think about access to and progress in the general education curriculum. And I actually omitted the word general here because really the curriculum is the curriculum. The general education curriculum is where it's at and what we need to be aligned to as much as possible. There's really a very small number of students that have something different going on for them. But this process, part of the conversation is what they call impact statements. Now, this can be for each item that you mentioned, or in general, how does the students, learning barriers, how do the students' learning barriers impact their access to and progress in the curriculum? It's important to consider those things. And so we can really start talking about what needs develop from those, challenges that the student has. Because once we've identified, hey, this is going to cause a real challenge in reading in all these different classes, that's going to be for me, an indicator that, hey, we need to do something about that. We can do some accommodations. We can look at some special design instruction and services. Those kind of things are going to, indicate that we need to respond in some way with the rest of the IEP. But if we don't mention it here, then there's little likelihood that we're going to have an opportunity to address it later on. So believe it or not, that was a short review of present levels. Are there any questions or comments as we look at those? Thanks for sharing the Padlet there, Alana.
And then these slides will be linked. Do they go? We'll send them out. A couple of people are asking for slides.
They will be in the self-paced module, and I think that link will go out when you get your certificate at the end of the session. If for whatever reason you can't get it or don't.
Yes, that will. It's Gail.
Okay.
They will get a link. Yeah.
Perfect.
When they get their certificates.
Awesome. So
Smart.
another incentive to fill out those feedback forms. And Gail likes getting those. So present levels is a lot of times where we begin our conversation at our meeting, when we have everyone sitting around, we're reviewing the information, getting the feedback and getting the input from our teammates in that session. So it's important that we cover all those bases and give everyone a voice in that session. So we have all that good information that we have. And sometimes I think, it's okay to have conversations where we say things like, the student really struggles with their behavior in those, after recess or getting off the school bus and those kind of things. Those are kind of general statements, though. So when we start talking about general things, we have to ask yourself, well, how do I know that, and what data do I have to support it? So that's kind of the requirement that I would put on this process is we don't just talk about what we think is going on. We refer to the evidence we have for that belief. So what do we think the students is underperforming in math classes? Then how do we know that? What information do we have? And how are we going to get that kind of information? And sometimes we understand there is an issue, and maybe we haven't considered it until we're at the meeting. And those are those times where we say, listen, here's what we know right now. Let's meet again after I've collected a little more information around this. Let's go look and find out for sure if this is the case before we go forward. Because that sometimes can happen too. And I don't want folks to feel like, pressured to go forward if you don't have evidence for that outcome. So present levels, obviously an important option as we discuss best practices in IEP writing. The next piece that sometimes can be, well, I won't say sometimes, it's often challenging, is aligning to grade level standards. So that's one thing that is mentioned in our rule, that our IEPs should be aligned to the standards for which the students from the grade that the student's enrolled in. See if I can say that a little more clearly. But this basically saying that the students in 8th grade, no matter what their current eligibility area or classes they're enrolled in happen to be, if they're in 8th grade and enrolled that way, then the standards that we align to should be 8th grade standards. Whether that's academic, the college and career ready standards, or the content connectors, they come from the grade the students enrolled in. Now, the key word in this whole phrase in this conversation is the concept of alignment. So nothing in the rule says that our goals have to match the standard. So that's an error a lot of folks tend to make, that if we're looking at an 8th grade standard, I don't know, I just randomly picked 8th grade there, and it says reading a nonfiction text and being able to, I guess, relate the plot and not plot necessarily the main idea and argue for its points or whatever it happens to be. We don't have to necessarily write a goal that says the exact same thing. We have to consider is the expectations in that classroom. What are the learning barriers that this student's going to experience in light of that particular standard? And that's where we can write our goal around. And often what we're going to find is that learning barrier that we've discovered or we already knew affects a multitude of standards. It may be most of the standards in an English class. It's hard to say. But when we look at a general standard, we can do some work and break those down into its component parts. I know that, for example, one of the standards I've used in the past or come to happens to do, after reading an informational text, the student will summarize that text. It goes on for a little bit more. But I know if I'm going to ask a student to do that and they're not reading at grade level and they struggle with the coding and general comprehension, they're probably not going to be able to perform that task, at least today. So where are we though? So right now we are working on, given that grade level text even, being able to underline the main idea, being able to circle the subject of the sentence, whatever it happens to be. So we're looking at some different things in those perspectives, but those things are building blocks toward the ultimate outcome we want to get to. So the real challenge within those things is realizing that we're going to be working on those learning barriers, and we also have to find a way for the student to access the content in spite of those learning barriers. So that's one of the big challenges that we have to really consider with this whole thing. So that's where accommodations and modifications are going to come in here shortly. So the grade level standard is important, but it's alignment is the key. And I guess to give you the short version, it's important that the alignment makes sense to you. So if we choose an 8th grade standard, that the work you're doing in the goal is connected and you understand the connection just makes sense to what you're doing. So if the students, that allows us to choose content that's on the instructional level of the students, or working to build their strengths, to work on those weak points to make them hopefully a strength, so they can slowly make gains for those grade level expectations. Sometimes it gets a little hard to comprehend and explain. So any kind of questions around grade level, aligning to grade level standards?
Yes, sorry.
Okay,
Okay. You have a high school student, we're gonna say a 10th grade student, but they're working at an 8th grade level. But they're 10th grade, so do I put 8th grade standards and 10th grade standards?
so you just choose for the grade they're enrolled in. So if they're a 10th grader, then that, now just in keeping in mind that the work you're saying they're reading at 8th grade level, that work is aligned. They have to master that skill set before they can approach that outcome that the standard reports. So we're building toward it, and it's connected, and it's or a rather better word, be aligned actually to that. So you
Well,
can
we've-
still have a
we've
goal
been-
that says, go ahead.
No, we've been using, if they're 10th grade, we've been using 10th grade goal or standards, but I just wanted to make sure, and we've always crosswalked them down to their grade
Yep.
level to make sure we're crosswalking straight.
Yep. And I'd also say that, and I think I'm right in this, that I don't believe that those standards are ever a compliance review. Yeah, I think that's looking, when as far as transition goes, even it's the goal. It may look at present level some, but it's a measurable skill-based goal is what they're looking for. I'm not sure anybody other than maybe a comment that, hey, this should be different, or they're not going to mention the standard that's selected. It's not one of those pieces of the rubrics and reviews. And the only thing that we could really say is to make sure that it's from the grade the students are enrolled in. Otherwise, it's really your choice what standard aligns to that. And I would think is, if you're going to pick multiple standards, the things you might consider, I usually encourage folks to just choose one if at all possible. But things like reading do affect other areas and different curricular areas. So that might be something to consider, that, listen, this student is working to learn to read more fluently here, and reading for comprehension is a new thing for them. So they're going to be challenged not just in the ELA classes, but also anytime they're asked to read. So that might be, especially independently. So that might be some evidence that, hey, this student needs some support in these other classrooms. And we're going to talk about accommodations here momentarily. Those will also be available. I'm going to have to keep moving. I'm going to have to move faster than this, Alana. So any other questions around that piece? I know that sometimes can be a little, if you're new to it, hard to get your head around that concept, and you're more than welcome to shoot questions at us as we're going through moving forward here. I do want to talk a little bit about accommodations. We like this quote from Leon Junt a lot. Accommodations are support for a skill that is different from the skill being taught and accessed. So keep in mind, when you think about accommodations and you're looking at a task the students set to perform in a class or be a part of, consider what's being assessed in that moment. And accommodations are really can help support the student where they're not being assessed. And like you can see that in this picture here, we're assessing the student's reading, not her eyesight. So we're going to give her accommodation of those glasses so that she can participate in that reading event or collecting that information. So, that one thing I think about here, and this sometimes I don't know if everybody has a problem with it, but it's sometimes folks don't think of it this way. But when a student's in a history or social studies class and they're asked to read a chapter, we're not really assessing their reading skills in those settings. We're asking them to read for information. And if their reading level is such that that's a barrier, listening might be an option, and that's an accommodation for that student in that setting. So that's one way to think about it. You know, we can extended time, preferential seating, all that laundry list that we have available to us is important. I would put a little caveat in some of those things. You know, when you choose things like extended time, preferential seating, small groups, you have that extra box for additional descriptors for accommodations. Don't be afraid to use that to spell exactly what you mean. If we just put down extended time, even if we're allowed to put it in that generally anymore, it's open to a lot of interpretation from classroom to classroom. So you might want to spell out for, you know, for classroom assessments, here's what extended time looks like. But for classroom, for homework or group work, here's what, you know, maybe they have an extra 15 minutes to complete the group work, or an extra day to do that, where they have extra 20 minutes for an assessment. You get, not necessarily that you get to decide that, but as a conference committee, you can talk that out. So
Yeah,
accommodation.
can
Yes,
I
ma'am.
add something about the extra time? The
Yes.
other reason why you really have to specify what extra time means, especially when you get to high school and people are trying to get credits, you don't want to give a student 2 days to finish something that now everybody else has moved ahead. So that child's always going to be behind. So you want to really think about what your extra time looks like.
So just to kind of finish up with accommodations, just keep in mind the expectations don't change with this. The standards don't change with this. The accountability is still there within an accommodation. So we're not, the intent here is not to make something, the sole intent is not to make something just easier, but to make it accessible. So it's necessary, not just nice. It's necessary for the student to have this accommodation in order to participate even in that event. Now, modifications are a little different story. Modifications are support for the skill we're actually assessing. So we're going to go through some examples here. I have a little poll, I think, to check in with you on this one. But you know, modifications do change the expectation. They do change what's being assessed. They do change the accountability for students. So even the things look the same from the presentation of the teacher, or the lesson may be very similar. The student may be asked to do something very different with that work, or be given some significant scaffolds so they can access that work at all, or the work's completely different, like I said, from what their peers are doing. So with that in mind, I know it's a brief kind of overview. I'm going to let Alana kind of explain the poll, and we'll dive into that.
Yeah, so accommodations, we you know, like we said, we always say like level the playing field, making sure that everybody gets what they need, and then modification is not changing the complexity of something, right? So I have a little 4-question poll. I'm going to have you guys to fill out to tell me if it's an accommodation or modification, so we can get some virtual participation. We know that's a lot, so I'm gonna launch it, and I'm going to have you guys vote. There's just 4 questions. Tell me if you think it's an accommodation or modification. And then we will talk about it a little bit, and we'll keep on going. Just a little quick check-in with you guys. Can you guys see the poll, Matt? Yeah, good. Okay.
Yeah, we're getting some. There we go.
There we go. I just need wait time. Sorry, guys. That's my fault.
This is that make sure you're awake test.
Yeah.
Good deal.
I'm awake, but I'm going to be driving, so I
Oh
am
no,
not
please don't.
going to
Yeah,
be
please
able
don't
to
do
Yeah,
answer.
that.
don't worry about that.
Yeah. We don't need you to.
That's a whole different kind of test.
Yeah.
We don't want you to. Yeah.
All right. Well, we have most people participated, which you don't have to. And we always say that choice is a friend of inclusion. So participate or not, or drive and just listen, and that's fine. So I don't know if you want to talk about this, Matt, or you want me to?
If you end the poll, will it show the results?
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to share it right now.
Oh, how about that?
There we go. All right. So the first question was classes completing 25 addition problems. You give a student 5 to complete. So 5 addition problems. So they're getting the same type of problem. So that would still be the same level of complexity, right? But you're just giving a student 5 because maybe their processing time, they take longer. They have, something in there with their disability. So that would be an accommodation. Some people were saying modification, which we sometimes get that. But the difference between that one and the second one is if the class is completing 25 addition and subtraction problems, and a student has to just complete the addition problems, that is changing the complexity, right? Because they don't have to do the subtraction problems. So that would be your modification, which most of you guys picked on that for the second one. So the first one, we always would say if kids just have to do less, is that really changing the level of complexity just to do more problems? Or could you see if they mastered that objective by just doing fewer problems on the first one? So does anybody have any questions about those two? Matt, do you want to add anything on that one?
No, I think that's a pretty common discussion we have. The first one, especially, just reducing the number, is that really, that can be that is an accommodation. The student's still accountable, like Alana said. As far as the classroom goal for that, we can show evidence that students even met the classroom goal for that class period. They can do the work. Now, why we have to do 25 of them versus 5 is a different discussion, but the volume of work is not what's being measured here. It's the accuracy that the student has. And that's different than the next one, like you said, that we're not attempting all of the same work that the classroom is the rest of the class is. So that is definitely a modification in that case.
Yeah. So the third and fourth one, giving extra time for a timed math test. So obviously the changing the complexity would be giving a student extra time, because if it is timed, like if you have I have a minute to do how many addition problems, and if you're giving another student extra time, that would be that could be a modification, because if you want to know how much they know in a certain time, that would be changing the level of complexity. Now, extra time, as we know in the IEP, that is an accommodation, because unless it's a time test or something timed or reading it quickly, you are not changing anything. You're just giving them some more time to get it done. So maybe, again, like they have processing problems or something like that, we're just giving them some extra time to accommodate those needs. So that would be the difference between an accommodation modification on those two.
Yeah. All right. So within those within those examples, you do have to consider what's being assessed, and that's going to help a lot with determining whether something's accommodation or modification. If you're changing what's being assessed, or the student's not being assessed or tested on the same things that their peers are, then that could be a modification. Or they're not fully, like the example we had where, this happens a lot when the students are assigned homework, but hey, just do the first 5 problems. That's technically a modification if everyone else is doing the next 25 and they involve different skills in those groups. Now, if it's all subtraction problems, it's no big deal. But if we change the types of problems throughout that assignment, then that's technically a modification of that. So it's a fine little distinction, I know, but it's an important one. It's really something that we need to make sure we understand, that we're not just changing things and to change things and make it easier. We have to really be purposeful about those choices. The last thing I'll say about this process is, and this is actually spelled out clearly in Article 7, that the inclusion of a modifying a student's work is not exclusionary. So that means that modifications can still happen in the general education classroom. So it doesn't, just because a student's receiving or participating in a modified assignment doesn't mean they have to be somewhere else to do that. That can happen all in the same classroom their peers are in. So that's a big idea. And I know that's probably worth some more time. And if you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to ask. But I want to touch on specially design instruction, then turn over the rest of the time to Alana to talk about goals specifically. When we start thinking about specially designed instruction, the simplest way I've thought of explaining this is it's an adult response to what we determine the student's learning barriers to be. So this is what the adults are going to do about the things we learned about this student. And that can be adapting content, method, or delivery of instruction to address those unique needs. And that result from the disability, and again, to ensure access to the general education curriculum. So when we get a chance to do a full day workshop on this, we dive in pretty deeply with each one of these things. But here we're going to talk about just in general, think about the adapting content. Students, looking at what the students are learning. We're expected to master the same things, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to look the same. It could be different content, can be different methods we use to reach that same end. And somewhat we need to think about, what's necessary for these students, so we can help eliminate those things that are we don't want to spend time that we don't have to on these areas. So let's focus on what's necessary for students to learn and think through methods. And sometimes I think Ann Benninghoff does a nice job. If you don't know who that is, has some great resource, YouTube videos, books, all those kind of things. She does a nice job explaining this, going through what this looks like. This adapting content for us as special education teachers may be introducing a strategy for organization, a strategy for time management or something like that. Well, that goes along with the curricular instruction. So it's adapting that work, or giving the teacher a tool that's going to make this content more accessible to the student, show them a different way to teach material that's going to make it more meaningful for not just students with IEPs, but maybe everybody in that classroom. So specially designed instruction can address the content. It's adapting content of the classroom. It can also include the strategies that we have in place. So what kind of methods are we going to use that are going to be effective for students with disabilities, of different interventions and techniques? Sometimes, having taken the time to develop your own little bag of tricks here, when I see these kind of struggles for students, do I have, if I have some reading challenges for students or decoding issues, what are my go-tos for those kind of things? So you have it all put together, and you can, even if you want to do that work, show where the evidence comes from for those things that they are effective for students. So that's some work that actually comes from Ann Benninghoff as well. But that's not a bad idea to have that checklist, or that bag of tricks, I always call it, lined out, so I know here's what I'm going to go. Here are my go-to things, my few things that I know work for my students. Then the last piece of this is delivery of instruction. So adapting the delivery, the time and place, the context of things, the location of that instruction, even the group size. That's something I mentioned with accommodations, that it's important to consider that. For some students, that small group can be just 1 or 2 people. For others, that group size might be 10 or 12 would be fine. So it's important to talk through that. The dosage, the pre-teaching and reteaching of information, prepping the student for the vocabulary, for the concepts that are about to be taught, and then reviewing with them what they should have learned from that instruction. What are the big ideas that maybe they didn't capture, that you want to make sure that they did capture from that instance. And just keep in mind that specially designed instruction and services in general like this don't necessarily have to be hour-long endeavors. They might be. We might have an hour of really focused instruction around reading or math. That's certainly possible, but it doesn't always have to be that way. Especially the pre-teach and reteach doesn't necessarily mean we have 35 minutes of review before we go in for a lesson. It could just be hitting a few highlights to prep the student, and just making that student a little bit more expert in that area than their peers might be, or they would have been otherwise. So those are some ideas around special design instruction. But again, it's really our response as professionals to that student's learning barriers. What are we going to do about them? Not just as special educators, but as general teachers and a team of instructors to support that student's needs. And that's really what the next slide kind of hints at, is the idea of that shared responsibility. Because those test scores, I don't want to dwell on that a little bit, but those test scores come back to everybody, not just the general education teacher, not just the special education teacher. They come back for us all. So if, like they say, a high tide raises all boats. The better we can do, the better quality instruction we can provide to our students as a whole, the better outcomes for all those students. So that's, that's an important concept, that we are all in this together. Not everybody sees it that way, but we all have a part to play with our students, and it's important that we step up and do that to the best of our ability. So that's kind of the lead in for Alana, give you really a short amount of time to talk about goals
okay.
here. But that's our next area here. We're going to talk about writing measurable goals and objectives. And I'll do the slides. You just let me know when you want me to move on. Okay.
Oh, yeah. All right. So writing measurable goals and objectives. I did throw the chat in the chat. I throw our Padlet for the writing measurable goals. So if you want to look at we have some example goals in there. If you want to have an IEP next to you and look at your goals, if you just want to listen, that's fine too. But I just wanted to give you some resources so that you can look that up. But we're going to talk about, you can slide to the next one. We're going to start with writing measurable goals. We have to have a target skill. Matt talked about earlier in Indiana. We have to teach something, so that would be the skill. You have to have a stimulus, material, or condition. So what are you going to give the student? The conditions, we have some examples of what it is, but a grade level passage, when is it going to happen? That's going to be our condition that we are going to need. And then we're going to add a criterion for acceptable performance. So how do we know when they learned it? We need to know a percentage, and it doesn't always have to be 80%. I often see 80%, but that's not what it always has to be. But how do we know that they have learned it? And that will equal our measurable goal. So these are going to be our parts to our goal. So if you're looking at our goals in our Padlet, or if you're looking at your IEP, we have to have a skill that we're going to teach, a stimulus, material, or a condition, and then we're going to have a criterion for acceptable performance, which is how do we know that they know it? And then that's going to be our measurable goal. So it's going to be pretty simple, pretty easy to go. We like this little formula. So the first part is going to be the target skill. So how will the student demonstrate the learning? Matt kind of talked about the SDI. So given specially designed instruction, how will the student demonstrate what he or she knows, understands, or can do by the end of the IEP? So I'm going to teach something to my students. I'm going to teach them with that specially designed instruction. I'm going to progress monitor it, and then I'm going to say if they reach that goal or not, right? So that's my instruction is the SDI, and I'm going to teach the student how to use it. I had a student that had autism, and so because she had autism, she was a visual learner. So in 3rd or 2nd grade, somebody taught her how to do touch math, right? So they of course, they modeled it, then they transferred it on to Sarah, and then she was able to do her touch math with her visual points, because I could see her even when she got to middle school, somebody taught her that, because she would still use those touch points for multiplication when she got to me in middle school. But so I knew that somebody taught her the specially designed instruction. She had autism, so she's a visual learner. So that is based on her disability, so that they taught her a skill. So they transferred it to her, and she was able to do that. And then she was able to get her math back. She was able to add very fluently by the time she got to middle school. So that would be the skill that she was taught. She generalized it, because when she was in middle school and I got her, I could see that somebody taught her that, because even though those dots weren't there, she was still using those dots, right? Because of that. So that kind of brings it all together. That was her target skill. She was fluent in addition. And then we knew that she could do that with her SDI that she was taught when she was younger. So that's just an example. So usually this is where I kind of wanted you to have your own IEP. Sometimes it's nice to see your own work, or maybe to see what words that will prevent the goals from being measurable. And I have done this in my past. I'm going to tell you right now. I think I wrote identify for goals all the time. But on the left, and if you guys want to write it in your chat, if you want to be you want to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but have you used these words before in your goals? And I have, so I'm going to give myself, I use them because I knew when I knew better, I did better. But until then, demonstrate, extend, increase, identify. Well, you guys can read these, obviously. Learn, unless you're driving, recognize, understand, or show. And I was an English major, so I like the more wordier sometimes. I was like better, and it's not. So I did better. These are difficult to observe, right? So I don't know if someone can understand or recognize. I can know if they can point. I do know if they can touch or print or circle. So the verbs that are more precise on the right are the verbs that we want to use in this slide. I think that people always really like this slide because it kind of talks about, let me look at my goals and see if I'm using the ones on the left versus, oh, I love it, Kaylee, to the ones on the right. So now I'm using write or circle or draw, and the behavior can be clearly observed. So if I'm having my aides come in my classroom and I'm gonna give them my progress monitoring or their data binders, they're going to be able to say, oh, these students can identify the, they're not going to say identify, I'm sorry. They're going to point to the correct alphabet. Let's say I taught kindergarten. So they're going to be able to point, they're going to have a field of 2 letters or 3 letters, and they're going to be able to point to them how many % of the time. So that is a lot better than me saying, how are they identifying this? And they'd have to like write down exactly what they're doing. No, my goals need to be precise. They need to use those verbs that you can measure. And so that is great if you are, and that's okay if you're on the left, but now we know how to clean those verbs up and we can clean those goals up and maybe move on more to the right. So how are they identifying that? How are they doing that? So just say what they're doing. And like Matt talked about, progress monitoring is really helpful to start with, because if you know how somebody else can take data on those goals, then we know it's a good measurable goal, right? If I can give it to somebody and they can tell me how they're going to take the data on that goal, then we know that it's a good goal. So thank you guys for adding that stuff into the chat. I laughed that Kaylee, I like that one. But does anybody have any questions or concerns about this one, or does that make sense to you guys? Great. Thank you. I like the thumbs ups. So the stimulus material or condition, we have to have that in our goal, right? So where and under what condition is a student expected to perform the behavior or skill? And we have some examples on the next on the next slide. Matt is like psychic, he knows when I have to move it. But here are some material or conditions examples that you can use. So given that they're grid reading passage, with the use of a calculator. So and I always think about this again with progress monitoring. When I'm going to progress monitoring my students' goals, this is what I'm going to give them, and this is what's going to exactly I'm going to see to be able to measure what they have learned, if they've gotten that criterion for that acceptable performance. So, you know, what is it around? We have to have a given a persuasive or narrative writing prompt, given a pre-made graphic organizer, the student will do this. So that is another tell in our, you know, the 3-part, this plus this plus this equals a measurable goal. This stimulus material or condition these are just some examples that you can use in your goals. These are not all the examples. There's plenty of more examples, but that's also in our Padlet. And then you guys might have different ones, and you guys can add them into the chat if you have anything else that you can help other people with. But you have to have a given in order to have a goal that's measurable as well. Any questions or comments on that? Any clarifying needed to be happening, or Matt needs to add anything? Or we're good? All right, I'm just keeping an eye on the chat as well. And then the criterion for acceptable performance, as we know, is how will we know when the goal is achieved? Thank you for your thumbs up. So again, we should start with the baseline data on our goals, right? Students, sometimes they're at 0, but oftentimes they're not always at 0. So if a student in the baseline and the present levels of academic and functional performance at PLAF are at 20%, say they're at 20%, you can start a goal of 20% and you want to get to 70% in that year, and that is good progress for that student, you can do that. You don't have to do 0 to 80%. We often see that. I think Matt and anybody else in the chat often see the 80% as like the goal. But sometimes if students have big deficits, 80% is a really hard to get to. And I had students in my class that were on alternate assessments, and sometimes their baseline data was lower and their progress took a little longer to get there, right? So even if I had 70%, I was making progress. I didn't have to get all the time to 80%. So I knew that. So if my student was at 0 to 80 is a lot to get to in 1 year. But you can, it depends on your baseline. It depends on what you think your students are able to do. But you need to have a goal to know when it is achieved. It doesn't always have to be just a percent. It could be, it can be like 80%, but it could be 2 out of 5 trials or 3 out of 5 trials. You can do it in different ways, but you do have to have a baseline, know where the student is, and know where they should go by the end of that year. So that would be how you can do that. We can go to the next one because I think that's our last one of this. And then criteria, you could do an accuracy, quantity, frequency, duration, latency, fluency or rate. And sometimes we think about different things about accuracy, of course, how many times can they do it right, correctly, quantity, how much is it happening, or like frequency, how often, duration, how long does it last? So, you know, a student, like, and I always go back to my classroom, but, you know, if a student is yelling for like 10 minutes, I want to get them to 5 minutes, or, you know, or something like that. But, and you guys, some of you guys might know that. You guys might feel me on that one. Latency, how long does it take a student to start something? So maybe if a student isn't getting their work completed, so we need to say, okay, they're taking like 8 minutes before they start a task. We want to get them to only start a task after 4 minutes or 3 minutes. You could use those for criterion for acceptable performance as well. Fluency, we always talk about with reading oftentimes, or maybe math fluency if you guys have math. But those are the different criterion in terms that you can use to write different goals. And of course, behavior goals might look a little bit different than academic, but they all have to have a skill that you're teaching the student. You have to know when they're going to be able to know and they can move on. And you have to have a condition or criteria stimulus to know when it's going to happen. And you have to be able to progress monitor it. So I have to give it to Matt, and Matt has to be able to tell me when he's able to progress monitor it. What does that look like when he's progress monitoring? I shouldn't have to explain it. He should be able to look at my IEP, read my goal, and be able to tell me how that's going to happen. It should all be written out in there. And if it's not, because sometimes, I don't know how about you guys, have you ever gotten an IEP, maybe a move-in student, and you're like, how do I even progress monitor? I don't even understand what this means. You know, I need to change this goal because this doesn't make sense. So if you're saying those kinds of things, yeah, we need to look at those goals and see how we can make them more measurable. It's usually because it's not measurable. And we usually have to figure out how we're going to progress monitor that to make sure that goal is, you know, it's a compliant goal and it makes sense for that student. Any questions or any thoughts about that? See some thumbs ups. I see some high fives, liking it. And I think these were all the slides that we had, but we're going to talk about if anybody has some specific goal questions about, like, do you have a goal that you have a question about or something like that? We have a little bit of time at the end, about 10 minutes, to talk out some goals.